You're listening to the American Home Contractors Podcast. So I'm here with Wade Sewell. Wade and I met after I had my geothermal installed, and I was introduced to you by my contractor. You helped get me set up with the renewable energy credits through geothermal. Appreciate that. We're here with Wade today to talk about incentives for solar, for geothermal, renewables, and you have a fascinating background. So I'd love to hear more about you, Wade, your education, the boards you're on. The floor is yours.
Sure, yeah. So I started as an environmental scientist roughly 30 years ago. I worked in industry, and then I went to consulting, and then for the last 20 years, I've owned my own business. I've had 3 different businesses over my entrepreneurial career. The last, I sold the first one, and now the last 2, I'm still working to develop. Yeah.
Cool. The business that you run the incentives through is ClearPath Renewables, right?
That's right.
Okay, cool. And when did you start that?
So I started ClearPath 3 years ago, specifically because no one was helping geothermal customers capture the incentives available for them, specifically with renewable energy credits. And I was a geothermal. I'm a geothermal. I own a geothermal home, and I knew about the credits when I installed my geo back in 2016. But at that time, those credits weren't worth very much, so no one was really paying attention to it. But due to new legislation back around 2020, the value of these renewable energy credits started to increase. So I actually certified my own house. We are customer number 1 for ClearPath. And once I realized how much money was on the table for us, which at the time was about $1,200 a year, I thought that was real money, and that the 20,000 plus geothermal systems around Maryland, who weren't taking advantage of this, they really should capture that incentive, because I really do believe in, geothermal in general, solar, all renewables, as an investment for the future. And it's important that they pay off for customers. Once I found out how much the value was for these renewable energy credits, I reached out to different geothermal installers, and the theme was the same, that they didn't have the expertise or the ability to do this for their customers, because the process is a little bit convoluted. You need a little bit of expertise for it. And it just dawned on me that, if I didn't step up, no one was going to step up. So I just decided to start a company to focus on that. And along the way, we've added solar renewable energy credits.
Yeah, most people don't know about the RECs. Most people are familiar with the SRECs, but the geothermal renewable energy credits, that was something new. And when we were going geothermal, our contractor spoke briefly about it, but they didn't really know how to add them up. They didn't really know and fully understand how many GRECs we would be producing in a given year. So the quantitative value of those GRECs over time was a little bit unknown. We knew about the 30% tax credit through the Inflation Reduction Act and all that, but how do you go about figuring GRECs for a geothermal system?
Yeah, so first, actually, I talked to a lot of customers who are considering geothermal. My phone number is on our website. Folks call me, they text me. My email's there as well. They'll email me, and then I'll call them or email them back to answer their specific questions, so that they have a firmer grasp on what those GRECs would be worth over time. But there are basically 6 different ingredients that go into figuring out how many GRECs a home would generate on a yearly basis. And that is what type of heating system they're replacing. Specifically, is it a fossil fuel or is it just an electric heat pump, that type of thing. How large their house is, how old their house is, how good the insulation is in the home, what type of hot water heater they have, and what was the efficiency of their old system for heating. So we just simply put that into a calculator, and that will spit out a number of how many renewable energy credits they get. They would be certified for every year after that. And it is a 20-year certification from the time the install happened. So, even for older systems that were installed, say 5, 10, even 15 years ago, we can still certify those for geothermal renewable energy credits. It's just that the 20 years will be limited by, how long the system's already been installed.
Gotcha. So newer systems, the advantage is a lot higher.
Oh, yeah. So there is a brand new program specifically for the geothermal customers, that started last year, which values the renewable energy credits quite high, towards $100 right now. And so my average customer is making about $3,500 a year right now, with the geothermal RECs.
Wow. And they'll be making that for 20 years, you say?
Yes, but the value of that will decrease over time, and that's just due to how the legislation is written. So that roughly, in 5 to 8 years, my average customer will probably be making about $2,400 a year.
Wow, that's good. That's like the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah,
and that's after the 30% and after other incentives.
Absolutely, there are a lot of incentives.
Can you talk about those incentives?
Yeah, absolutely. So, between geothermal and solar, there are a lot of incentives in common. Right, both solar and geothermal share the 30% federal tax credit for, I believe, another 9 years, right, from now. And then there are the incentives from the state. The state has, for solar, that $1,000 rebate for residential customers. For geo, it's actually $3,000. Then there's some counties in Maryland. There's 4 that have a property tax credit. That's Hartford, Baltimore, Anne Arundel, and Prince George's. They have a property tax credit, whether you go geo or whether you go solar. So that's pretty nice. And then one of the biggest incentives really is, is really the renewable energy credits over time, because those will, in some cases, be more than the federal tax credit. When you add it all up over time, it actually can be more than that federal tax credit, which is typically thought of as the largest incentive. But really, the Maryland program for renewable energy credits is huge.
And is Maryland one of the most friendly states for geothermal?
Actually, for geothermal, yes, absolutely, when it comes to incentives. But in general, our renewable energy credits here in the state are fairly mild, to maybe middle of the road compared to our surrounding states, like, say, Massachusetts, New Jersey, in DC. Those renewable energy credits, particularly on the solar side of things, are higher. So the thought is that, because the state of Maryland wants to really incentivize renewable energy adoption here in the state, that those renewable energy credits generated from solar systems will probably be propped up. Again, that'll be revisited. In fact, there was legislation last year to do just that. It didn't get passed, but I know that's going to be revisited this year in the legislative session to hopefully, even make that incentive greater.
Interesting. So how do these incentives come about?
It's all legislation through the state. Well, I should back up. For renewable energy credits, it's specifically a state program. So that is just through the state legislature. It's not mandated by the federal government at all. So the state, quite a while ago, basically 2 decades ago, decided that to reach the goals that we have in this state for renewable energy, that we needed to adopt this incentive program so that utilities, who are the ones who buy the renewable energy credits, could both take advantage, take credit for that the renewable energy systems that were being put in place, but also to incentivize either residential customers or commercial customers to monetize that environmental benefit from their renewable energy system to help pay for that system over time. And it really does lower the cost of ownership, the payback time, and it's just a really great way of incentivizing renewable energy systems in the state.
So did you go solar first or geothermal first?
I went geo first, mainly because my roof it was kind of at that point where it needed to be replaced, but I wasn't quite ready. I had some issues on my roof. I had some ice damming that was actually happening in the wintertime a couple times. And so I knew I had some issues, and I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to address them just locally in that one spot. Really didn't want my roof not to match. So finally, a couple years after I went geo, I decided to just completely re-roof my house and get that behind me, fix those problems, and go solar at the same time, knowing that I would never have to replace that roof again while I'm alive. And then the solar was, I wanted to go solar, so it just enabled that.
So when you went geothermal, the price of your GRECs is different than people getting them these days, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So my system's older. It qualifies for the older program. So the actual renewable energy credits that I sell for my house are worth about a third of the new systems.
Mm.
Yeah.
Damn. And you had no way of knowing. Obviously, an early adopter with geothermal, but nowadays it really makes a lot of sense for people to go geothermal.
Yeah, I mean, most people, this new tier of geothermal RECs started in 2023, but most people from 2022 and back had no idea that this program even existed. So, when they find out about it, it's just icing on the cake. Because they've already decided they were going to go geo for whatever reason. Geo will pay for itself typically in like a 10 to 12 year time frame. But now with the renewable energy credits, we're seeing a 4 to 5 year payback for geo. And then for older systems like mine, it's just icing on the cake.
Hmm. And then, so you have mutual clients of ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
A couple of people with Tesla Solar Roof also are using you for geothermal, renewable energy credits, and their SRECs as well.
Yes.
What is the process for getting signed up and getting connected so that they can take advantage of these incentives?
Absolutely. So they're basically two different ways. Geothermal and solar are two different animals, a little bit different. So for geo, I've created a process through our website. It's just an enrollment form, and that captures all of the information we need to get their application started for that customer to the state of Maryland. We're full service, turnkey. I really believe in taking care of the customer and making it as easy as possible for the customer. I mean, we are the experts here. We've done well over 1,000 geothermal applications to the state. So you might as well let us handle it. We don't charge for that, so there's no real barrier to entry to, signing up with us for geo. And then what we charge as far as a brokerage fee, because that's what you need as a broker after you have the certification, your home will be generating these credits, which are commodities that utilities buy only in large quantities from broker dealers. The fees that we charge are actually half of the industry standard. So you are in very good hands with us. We'll do that application for free. And then, of course, our brokerage fees are half. And then on the solar side of things, also, I try to make that as easy as possible. There's a few things that we need from customers in order to also certify their solar system with the state. It's simply a plan set for the solar. So we have to enter that data into the state database. We need the certificate of completion from the utility. And then we will need a document for just giving us permission to transact those renewable energy credits on their behalf. We'll need your direct deposit information because that's how we pay our customers. It's just through neat and clean direct deposits as soon as we can possibly pay our customers after the utility pays us. And that's pretty much it. I've tried to make it as simple as possible, but there are things that the state requires, and that we'll have to interact with the customer to get those documents.
And how often do you get paid out? And I know some brokers offer a one-time lump sum payment up front. And would you recommend that, or would you recommend just cash flowing over time?
Well, there's a couple things there. So on the geothermal side of things, right now we're paying our customers quarterly. So every quarter they'll receive that payment. For on the solar side of things, we're doing it monthly. And that helps solar customers typically because most solar customers go use a loan. They've got a monthly payment. I try to sync that up with that to help them out that way. And then I'm sorry, your second question was?
Oh, the lump sum.
Oh yeah, right. I'm actually currently working on a lump sum option for customers, mainly on the geothermal side, but we could also adapt that on the solar side of things. It really depends on the customer's time frame as far as how long they're going to be on their home. And if they sell their home, if they choose to sell their home, then they could take the lump sum from us. If they think that they may have difficulty monetizing that value, they could take a lump sum payment from us.
I mean, the broker has to be winning in that scenario, right?
Well, there's risk, of course, that the broker's taking on because, although, Maryland is a very friendly state for this type of program, there is uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen, say 5-10 years down the road. So in order to monetize long-term, benefit of owning the renewable energy credits, it does take some risk, and having a financial third party, backing this up, there's only so much risk that they're willing to take. So typically, I would say that the customer will no doubt, make out on the long run if they keep the renewable energy credits, because I do believe that this, is going to be a long term. All of it's going to be long term. There's nothing on the horizon that says that it's going to go away. But it really just depends on the scenario of the customer, if it makes sense to cash out now or to hold them for the long term.
So we hear a lot of pushback from people that aren't really into renewables or solar. They don't think it's feasible, centered around the incentives. Like, unless if these incentives went away, the solar industry would collapse, geothermal would collapse. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. What would you say to those people as a defense for, maybe incentives also on the fossil fuel industry? Because I believe there are subsidies and other things going on the fossil fuel industry alongside, clean renewables. We want to promote this type of energy as a sustainable future. But what would you say to those people saying, solar's fake, geothermal's fake, and it's because they need incentives to survive?
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. So the way I look at it is that investments in renewable energy, where we're self-sustaining as a family or even larger, communities and the nation, that just makes sense long term, so that we are insulated from price shocks due to, fossil fuel commodities, right? We saw that in the beginning of the Ukraine war, where the price of oil products went up quite high. They've settled back down, but still they're a little high. And folks who are on fuel oil or propane, they definitely feel that impact. There's always uncertainty around that. My home was propane before we went geothermal, and some years we were paying $4 a gallon for propane, and some years we were paying about $1.10. It's a wide, but I look at for each technology, right, on the geo side of things. I love our geosystem. The geosystems are among the highest quality air conditioning systems that you can possibly have in your home, and heating. It's so quiet. It basically just runs low in the background all the time. You really don't hear it. If it needs to heat the house up really quickly, or cool the house really quickly, you'll hear it. Like it'll get loud, and of course it has a lot of capacity to do that. But in general, it just operates quietly in the background. It's just very, very great living environment. So from beside the aesthetic component of Geo and being the highest quality system that you can buy for your house, it's going to use the least amount of power over time. And for me, I actually love that from a conservative standpoint. I know that I am saving, energy, and I'm saving my resources over time, because I know the payback that will happen. The price of electricity has gone up quite a lot. So knowing that my system operates at least a third more efficiently than, say, a heat pump option, that just makes me feel good, because I know that I've made that solid decision. And then on the side of solar, with that, again, the price of electricity going up, and with the electrification of so many things, particularly the transportation industry, that price is probably going to continue to increase due to all the upgrades that are needed across the grid, that type of thing. So, when you go solar, you are insulating yourself from that, those price shocks and the continued price increase every year. But again, I just come back to, I love, actually, from a patriotic standpoint. I think it's very patriotic to go renewable, because then you are insulating yourself and the country from external, foreign influences for our energy.
So you got two sides of the equation. You got producing clean energy and reducing your consumption.
Yeah.
Right, on the geothermal side.
Yeah.
Where do you see this industry heading in the future with geothermal and solar? A lot of folks are, I guess, not right now concerned about the 30% going away, but there was a time when it was 30% and it went down to, 25 4%? Was it 24%?
Went to 26, then it was going to
26.
22.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was stepping down. People were concerned that it would, be taken away.
Right.
Are some people still concerned that these incentives may go away?
Well, right now they're locked in for the next 9 years. So unless Congress acts, then we're locked in, which is great. You coming back to your question of can solar or geothermal stand on its own without these tax incentives? We saw a slight decrease when it actually went away for about a year and a half with Geo. So interestingly enough, when solar still had it, but Geo was back in, I believe it was like right before 2020, it might have been between like 2018 and 2020. The Geo industry actually had to stand on their own for about a year and a half. And they did see some drop off, but due to the quality of the systems and how much energy they can save over time, the Geo industry still survived. So I think that the industry can stand on its own without those incentives. It's just that we are trying to move the country quickly, to renewable energy. So that's why those incentives are in place.
Are you seeing a lot of folks that have geothermal and or solar owning electric vehicles?
Oh yeah. So it's just a natural, goes hand in hand, because once you understand the geothermal, you understand solar, particularly, you look at how efficient electric cars are, how, the cost to operate is typically about 4 cents a mile, whereas, a gasoline powered car is typically in the 14 cents a mile, not counting for depreciation or anything like that, but just the operational aspect of the two different vehicles are very different, as far as the costs go. And I think once consumers start, understanding specifically from geothermal how that payback, once they get that mentality of looking at their systems that they have, whether it's, the system of heating their home, the system of supplying electricity to their home, and then the system of transporting them and their family, looking at the cost of all of those things, once they get that mentality, it just makes sense.
So I know when we are completing a solar project, filling out the paperwork for the incentives, wrapping up the project post-close is a little confusing for most people. So what would you recommend? How do they reach out to you, and what are the next steps once that project has PTO, permission to operate? Like, what's the very next step that we should be telling people to do?
Yeah, so there's a checklist of things that we need. We're a very high-touch company, so we'll interact with you directly as a human. We try to make it as simple as possible for the customer.
So just connect them with you, and you'll white glove service them into getting all those incentives they deserve.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. What are you looking forward to in the solar and geothermal space? New products, there's Span.io electric smart panels, which are really neat and interesting to help with the awareness of what your home is using as far as electricity, and also for load shedding with batteries. Are you a proponent of batteries?
Batteries have come a long way, and definitely for some customers, they make sense. It seems like we've had more and more grid disruptions with the storms that we've been seeing over the last few years. So with that, a lot of customers, they don't want the disruption, particularly since some of them have been a day or even longer. It all depends on where the customer lives. Some are without power for a week. So the great thing about combining solar with battery is that the solar actually recharges the battery while the grid is down. So it's a really great way of not disrupting your home, particularly with more people working from home, that type of thing. So it's just important to stay up, that uptime, and that industry is just going to grow leaps and bounds, particularly as more and more solar is installed, and to stabilize the grid. There's been places like even in New York. I don't know if you heard about this, but in Manhattan, they actually put a virtual power plant in Manhattan to, instead of upgrading the grid infrastructure, which would have been exceedingly expensive to possibly do that to that location in New York City, they actually used a lot of power walls, Tesla power walls, to stabilize the grid so that they didn't need that costly upgrade. Interestingly enough, the individual customers were, incentivized to do that. So, probably we'll see a little bit more of that to stabilize the grid.
And I think, the batteries are, an incredible product add-on to any solar system. But I also think they're going to become more and more important as time goes by, and especially as the incentives start to step down, right? Because net metering, a lot of people are confused about net metering and then how the battery comes into play. But correct me if I'm wrong, in other parts of the country, maybe not the Mid-Atlantic quite yet, but in other parts of the country, they stopped paying retail for the net metering and they've reduced it down to wholesale. And then some places don't even allow for net metering.
Right. I believe it was like Nevada maybe did that. I think that was partially because they had so much solar adoption and their skies are so clear and they get so much production from the solar that there was just during the peak periods of solar production during the day, there was so much excess electricity being produced that the value of the electricity actually would go negative. And because no one could use it, they couldn't get the power where it needed to be. So that's where there's so many different innovative solutions to store electricity, even mechanically. In fact, in Maryland, we have one of those facilities where water is actually pumped uphill to a reservoir and then released later to power a generator. And that goes on every day. So that's a simple way of doing it beyond just the typical, the large battery pack installations that we've been seeing. So there are a lot of innovative solutions to store electricity that will hopefully help that out. Here in the Mid-Atlantic, we don't have nearly that type of solar adoption. We're typically in the 1% to 2% range right now of solar adoption as far as how much electricity is used on the grid. Whereas out in Nevada, that type of thing, they're like 10 times higher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we have a long runway before we get to those types of challenges, and particularly as more and more local storage options will come available. We'll see what gets there first. But you bring up a really interesting point that home storage can be used to mitigate that. Particularly if, like in California, electricity actually costs more during the nighttime. So what people do there is they use their solar to charge their batteries, and then they discharge their batteries at night. And they're actually making money that way. It's possible that I could get that way here. And then, of course, batteries make even more sense for us.
Yeah, time-based, the energy arbitrage. Mm-hmm. We have people requesting batteries for numerous reasons, but I think battery storage is definitely, the adoption rate is going bananas. We keep hearing more and more people wanting to couple batteries with their existing solar systems. Whenever we sell a Tesla solar roof, I think our take rate is around 60% to 80% for new construction. Yeah. So people are starting to understand where the batteries fit in. Yeah. And even though it doesn't affect the production of the solar system itself, as far as the SRECs and those incentives, it does impact net metering. And I think people are starting to see, other parts of the country, how it went from retail to wholesale to no net metering. And, why net meter back if you're not going to get the full value? Yeah. Store it in your battery. And if you have variable rate electricity, then discharge it in the evening or during those peak hours where you would be otherwise spending more money to get the electricity from the grid.
Absolutely.
So with battery adoption, is battery adoption mainly for solar, or are people starting to do that as a standalone just to connect to the grid and use it kind of like a generator?
Well, that's a really good question because the Inflation Reduction Act actually made it so that you can have a battery without it coupled to solar and still get the 30% federal tax credit. So you don't have to have solar for battery backup, particularly if you're maybe in a location that's very shaded. Maybe you're in the woods and it doesn't make sense to go solar. You can still have that battery backup and get the incentive.
Do generators and other forms of backup also have those incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act, or is it just batteries?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't operate in the generator space, but I'm not aware of that at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I feel like the killer app is with the battery tied to solar, because if the battery is just tied to the grid, then
Right.
once you deplete the energy in the battery, then grid's out, you're still waiting for it to regenerate.
And the batteries don't, they don't have any moving parts, right? Besides maybe a fan, a cooling fan, right? But a generator, you install it year one, it works great. Year two, it works great. Year three, if you haven't maintained it, it has its own little battery to start it up. If that's dead, your generator's not going to start. It needs its oil changed. It needs debris kept away from it. It is out in the elements, so it is exposed to the hottest days and the coldest nights. So generators over time wear out, and they do require ongoing maintenance, which is costly. So when you look at the cost of operating a generator over, say, the same lifespan of a battery, the battery wins out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, plus the generator's burning fuel.
That's right.
You get the emissions.
Yeah, you got the emissions. It's noisy. You need to make sure the fuel can get to you. In the ice storms in Texas a few years ago, they actually had disruption of natural gas supply. So, anyone that had a natural gas fed generator, it wasn't working. So the nice thing is the sun is going to come up, so the solar is going to recharge your battery. And so, depending on the size of your battery, you may have to be careful with how you use things. You may not be able to use everything in your house like you normally would, but you can monitor that very easily, and just cut back on what you need to do to get through that grid outage.
Excellent. And now, as far as seasonality is concerned, most people are producing the bulk of their electricity through solar, spring, summer, fall?
That's right.
So, when they're not producing as much in the winter, I'm assuming that the SRECs and the payments are going to be much lower. And, it's always interesting to hear, when people get their system installed in like November and they get PTO in, December, January, and they start to monitor how much their system's producing, and they're kind of disappointed early on. Do you have any statistics or percentages on average that your system would typically produce in the winter compared to the summer and fall and spring?
So in general, a solar system is going to produce about twice as much at the peak of summer versus the low of winter.
Gotcha.
So I think it's all about communicating those expectations up front with the customer so that they understand fully just the physics behind solar, which is the length of the day and the angle of the sun in the sky, which will impact solar generation. So I think that communication up front is really important, so that they understand that, and that we're, in many cases, it's difficult to get to 100% offset.
Mm-hmm.
My own home, I don't have it 100% offset. I wish I could, but I don't have the roof space for it. If you can get to 100% offset, then we are simply trying to match the total usage over the year to the total production over the year,
mm-hmm.
which those things are going to not always line up perfectly, particularly since there's no solar during the night, and you're definitely going to be using electricity during the night. So it's just kind of that is usually a light bulb moment for a customer about how solar works. But we do the best we can to match what the customer wants to do, on the roof and as far as production goes.
Yeah, it is funny when people talk about just having a full off-grid setup. And it's like, all right, well, in order for that to work, you need to be producing a little bit more, essentially, than you're consuming in the winter months. So then if it's approximately twice as much in the summer, then you're going to be, where's all that excess electricity going to go? Right? So yeah, it is very difficult to system size based on consumption on an annual basis and say, yeah, I want to be off-grid. It's probably best to be connected to the grid in most situations, I would assume.
Oh yeah, I've actually never done an off-grid, but every once in a while there's a customer that doesn't quite understand how solar works. They think that they might be disconnected from the grid once they go solar, but really solar just works in parallel with the grid. So if your house happens to be, using more power at any given moment, it's going to pull from the grid. If your solar happens to be producing more than your home is consuming at that moment, it just pushes out through your meter. Your meter counts down, and and it goes to one of your neighbors, so they can take advantage that moment of having actually solar energy powering their house. But of course, you get full credit for that. That can be used during the nighttime and winter months.
I got a kind of off the wall question. The peer-to-peer energy market, right? Is this something that's going to be built out eventually? I know there's certain things I've stumbled upon where people are trying to build out a marketplace for selling, I guess, XREX or energy from peer to peer. You produce excess electricity that you're not going to consume, and you can sell it in theory to your neighbor or somebody else in your neighborhood. Have you heard about that? Have you seen anything like that?
Actually, I haven't.
No?
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard rumblings. I don't quite understand it, because electrons, on the grid are just going to, your house, and you can't say, oh, I want these electrons to be diverted to my neighbor's house because I don't need them.
Well, there actually is something in place already that's kind of similar to that, and it's called virtual net metering, and that's available for nonprofits, agricultural entities, and government entities. And what does that mean? So if you have a property, a contiguous property or multiple properties, next to each other, and there's multiple meters, but it makes sense to only put the solar on one meter. Say you had a very large building that was perfectly oriented towards the sun, and you could build a solar array that offset the power that all of those different meters from all those different facilities, used. You can do that in Maryland. It's called virtual net metering or aggregate net metering. And I've had multiple customers that have come to me for that, and we've done that successfully. So, for instance, right now I have a customer that has 4 different meters on his property. It's a farm. It's kind of small farm, but it's a farm, and we are putting the solar on his one barn because it's perfect. It's a perfect location for solar. He's going to get the most bang for his buck there, and then we're hooking it to the other 3 meters virtually, and the utility takes care of that. So whatever excess power that comes out of that one meter simply trickles down to then the daughter meters, in succession to wipe those bills out.
Interesting. I just want to keep diving into, talking about stuff that's super nerdy and maybe not as interesting for our internal team, but I'm super interested on the peer-to-peer energy market. I mean, I would love to have the flexibility to produce clean energy and, save it, and to just have a marketplace where I could tap into and say, hey, there's people in need of power. Maybe I donate it. Maybe I say, hey, I have excess. I'll give it to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like the fuel fund.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be pretty cool. Hopefully we'll see stuff like that built out in the future. But yeah, where can people go to find out more about you? Do you want to give them your website, email, phone number, anything that you want to share with them?
Sure. Yeah. So my website is clearpathrenewables.com. And that's what that's for the renewable energy credits. And, you're welcome to shoot me an email. It's just simply wade@clearpathrenewables.com. Or you can text me 443-910-4613.
Excellent. Thanks, Wade. Appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Yep.
You've been listening to the American Home Contractors Podcast. You can find us across the web on YouTube, X, TikTok, and Instagram at AHCDMV. Thanks. We'll see you in the next one. If you have an upcoming job or have any further questions about this or another product or service we offer, please contact us at AmericanHomeContractors.com. Thanks.